Hope you're feeling it today, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the First Walk. We got quite the podcast for you today. Some tragedy, some loss, some new perspective. Envelopes folding, never to be reopened. Let's take you on a journey and bring you right back home. The First Walk. How you doing, Connie?
Good. That's a good question. That's a good question. I'm good. Doing well. A little sleepy from allergies, but it's a bumpy transition, and I'm lucky I have a lot of tools in my wheelhouse that's like those issues like can physically and emotionally not feel so turbulent.
Well, it's time to wake up because we're doing a podcast. Yeah,
Joe
that's right,
yerbed
listeners. I just had a yerba mate. I'm on the opposite end of Connie right now. I'll carry her energy through this a little bit, but I'm sure she'll get a second wind in here.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So, yeah, we already kind of been talking about it and letting the mic run, but in terms of just like sheer selecting a topic and embellishing on it, cathedral in Notre Dame burning down. A little sad, you know. Hurt me for a second. I was like, I'm never going to get to go there and walk those halls from a personal level. And then my next instinct was to be like, who's behind this? You know, because we want an answer. We don't just want a monument of the people burning down with no resolution or no enemy to point to and say, you did this. And someone to blame.
I think we're also not necessarily desensitized, but would we be surprised if this was no, I think we're so, especially throughout Europe, it's just unfortunately really common that there's a really dark force behind these tragedies, whether they're like historic places or just public space in general. Like we're made to feel strategically as if there's no place too sacred, no space that's too safe. Schools, churches, mosques, synagogues.
I think that, you know, right now we don't know who someone did it.
But all the investigation is pointing, like that's the direction their investigation has gone. So the conspiracy part of me is like, why are they angling their investigation in that way? But it seems likely since they were in the middle of renovation, that particular tower
that it was an accident,
right? Yeah, that was the tower that they were renovating, the one that caught fire. So
right,
but it would also be a good alibi.
What I was thinking was how much the fact that we were quick to say, oh, it might have been a terrorist attack, or it might have been the Muslims that did it because it was a Christian institution.
Yeah,
it speaks to the sentiment of the time and the cultural conflict that's happening right now in Europe, where you have like these waves of immigrants coming in that's changing the culture of Europe in one way or another. And some people are saying that, okay, like this diversity is making us stronger. Some people are saying it's eroding cultural values. And, you know, my mind, before I even read anything about it, went to the terrorist attack that happened in Paris in 2015. And that was pretty brutal. I think like over 100 people died. You know, and that was a Muslim terror attack. But this one, like you said, it seems to be an accident. But just the fact that we're so quick to blame or want to blame someone, one, it just speaks to something that's inside ourselves as to how we make enemies out of things just because there needs to be. Enemies are created out of convenience, you know, to unify us. And never have we been more unified when there's like a thing that we all admire that's being threatened or being taken away. Like, even though in many cases it's not comparable, I thought about 9/11 and about, you know, losing these two towers as well as the other attacks was just like more of a psychological blow to the United States and to Western civilization as well, because the world felt it. And I think that's what's happening now. Americans don't really get to feel for things that's outside of their bubble in the US, but I think there was a real sense of pain and loss that was associated with this.
Yeah, I mean, every major event, especially tragedies now, are going to be viewed through the lens of, I guess, different modernities coming forward. We had talked a bit about different reactions to, and sort of the iconoclasm of, oh, this building was historic for immoral reasons. It represents the Catholic Church. It represents colonialism. It represents oppression. And, you know, people have called out hypocrisies of the global mourning for Notre Dame, but not for historic churches and buildings that have been lost in warfare, have been just lost throughout history.
Yeah, if it wasn't in France and say it was in Iraq or Iran or just somewhere out in Africa, would we care as much?
Right.
And the posts you sent me were brutal. Did you black out the names on your own?
I didn't.
Is that you? Okay.
Oh no. Some of the posts I had gotten from other sources. There were two that were from a person I'm friends with on Facebook that I had seen. So we can tell listeners what they say.
I'm going to read one. This is an Instagram post with over 500 likes, and it's only an hour old, so it's probably blown up more. But it's a picture of Notre Dame burning, which is oddly beautiful because it's built in the Gothic era, and it's like kind of, to see it in flames like that at the same time you're mourning, it must be like, wow, look at this. But anyways, so it was a picture of that saying, "Burn, daddy fucker, burn. Proof our magic is working. If there is one thing that bored the fuck out of me in art school, it was studying Western architecture and churches and buttresses and cloisters and stupid colonial splooge garbage. Y'all don't give two fucks about Palestine or indigenous genocide around the world, but yeah, shed a tear for this shit. French colonizers had it coming. Karma's a bitch, though. Hashtag we don't need no water. Hashtag let the daddy fucker burn." I almost regret reading that because that's some heavy shit to talk about in there.
That goes against our brand in a lot of ways. I think it's absolutely appropriate and probably necessary in a lot of levels to talk about history with an accurate lens, with a lens that goes against narratives that have benefited other institutions that were in power. So, I mean, I still see it. I work in a school and I still see how Columbus is taught, how children are taught to understand wars that we've participated in, things, our interaction with indigenous people. But it also is hard to explain a dark and sordid history to that Americans and ancestors perhaps of ours have committed. So but at the same time,
it's very much like looking at Western civilization and redefining it through the lens of our time, as if the fact that there's this say pedophilia problem in the Catholic churches throughout the Middle Ages and today, that is the defining feature for a lot of people of what Western culture, what these big Gothic cathedrals, what they represent.
Right.
And I mean, I'm sure you don't fully agree with that either.
Well, I just think while it's appropriate to talk about injustices, especially if they have been oppressed or silenced, suppressed is what I meant to say. It is so much harder for anyone on either side of a debate to speak with empathy. If that post was like, well, perhaps this can explain to the world the tragedy felt by Palestinians when their communities and their sacred places of worship have fallen prey, either to a natural accident or, you know, in many more cases, especially in indigenous and more vulnerable communities, to an outside force. And it's been very painful. And I think people that mourn together, like you've said, have a shared bond. And in this case, which I think is probably more often than not, there's not one easy enemy. There's no the good guy, the bad guy. It's like this big tapestry. And we've all experienced that. We've all experienced pain of losing something important to us in our group, whether it's our own individual families or communities.
Right.
We're a very fortunate country that we are not at constant threat from another. You don't have American refugees leaving in throngs.
Well, it's one of, you know how they say history is written by the winners?
Mhm.
That seems like it was true until now. Now history is written by the tweeters. Like, it's like,
which is
you don't
in
have
some
to be
levels,
a part of the losing side to or the winning side to have your story be the predominant story anymore, because
Right.
now everybody can have their story published to the world.
It feels like we're at level 1 in terms of, we're at the level of like spiritually and in terms of information, digging up, okay, this was, we were taught this was bullshit. Here's the actual truth. And it's in your face and it's very confrontational. And we haven't gotten to the point of seeing through all the way to the other side of like the anger and the pain that people have experienced. So now it's just, let's mimic what was done to us. Let's mimic the pain and oppression was put onto us.
Yes.
And the you know, the obvious target for that is based in a almost a shallow way. White men, especially if they're biologically born and identify as men, especially if they're Western.
And then you
regardless of economic status,
you do the same thing that you set out to fight against in stopping racism,
which is another history cliche, right?
Stopping prejudice. Yeah,
history repeats itself.
Yeah,
and it's like the cycle. Imagine a family where a child was abused and they grow up and they realize, I was not treated right as a child. Everything was, this was wrong. And now maybe their father's in a nursing home and they just beat them every day, or they beat someone who had nothing to do with it. They beat a person at a bar because they're angry at them, or they beat their own child. And
did you see
continues.
There was this LGBT protest that happened in Patchogue because there's this bar, the Cliftons, I think it's called, where they had made a post where it was a trans woman and a man kind of leaned up against each other talking, and it was the post was like, should I tell him or we, or should I tell him or wait? And it was it was like hashtag another night at the Cliftons, basically a transphobic post.
It just sounds like a shit post.
Oh, this is clearly a dude that's, you know, it kind of, that was the sentiment. So
sounds like a bad
big,
meme.
backlash where there are hundreds of people that showed up and protested.
Right.
A lot of people hung out at the bar. The bar apologized and like kind of did what they could to try to backtrack on it, but ultimately it didn't really. I don't think it had much of an effect. Partly because if you go back on this person's Instagram, you see there was a couple like transphobic or homophobic posts coming from them.
Yeah.
So, you know, I have sympathy for people that are, you know, make a mistake or say something that's in poor taste. But for repeat offenders like that, you can kind of see where their mindset is. And so that was a cool moment of retaliation that happened.
You think, like, from the perspective of, like, the protesters, that it was, I don't know. I'm of two minds on this because, I mean, the ability that we have to be able to just go out and protest, that's great. Like, that's probably rare in the world. Maybe less so now in the modern era, but definitely throughout history was rare. On the other hand, it's sort of good to be able to have the the ability to speak completely freely,
Mhm.
to at least know who your enemies are, right? If people are harbor, let's say it sounds like this guy just had, that was his taste in humor and he was
Mhm.
posting shitty memes, but like, let's say he hated trans people and he sought violence against them or had some kind of
Right. It
other
wasn't like that.
dangerous
Yeah.
beliefs. If he, kept them to himself, but was secretly believing them, you wouldn't have the chance to boycott his business or like, it's in a way to have things out in the open and discussed and say, oh, absolutely. And then within your community, oh, absolutely not. I will not support this business.
But it's
The right to
like that
protest and the right to
business
free speech.
has a stamp on it, because it's like now everyone will forever think of that business as like the transphobic business, which I mean, they're definitely going to get the brunt of some like misdirected anger, especially at employees that just worried about their job security working there. I'm sure, and now have to deal with this, like, why do you work for this place, and kind of thing. Yeah, at first I looked at it, I was like, this is just poor taste, and I don't know if hundreds of people should be protesting. But I saw a couple more Instagram posts after that. I'm like, all right, I'm kind of sold that these people need like a public message, a peaceful public message that that's not to be tolerated.
Yeah.
And that's what happened for the most part. So the fact that it was peaceful, the fact that the people apologized, I'm like, all right, it seems like things are pretty much all good here. It's like democracy did its due process today.
Well, the story though continues, doesn't it? I mean, is there a path for this person to redeem themselves, and are they even interested if they feel that they've been publicly lambasted? I mean, is the psychology behind, like, I don't know. I think to change people's minds, a lot of it has to be done like through changing their heart. Do you ever? There's this great show. I think if anyone is interested in psychology or just human interaction in general, it should be required viewing to watch Queer Eye on Netflix. It's brilliant. It's actually a very uplifting show. 5 gay guys. They make over. It's usually a straight white guy, but they've done gay men. They've done a few women, and it's very uplifting. It's never like, oh, you're ugly, your clothes suck. It's always just like, oh, I mean, for whatever reason, like maybe you've downloaded messages that you shouldn't take care of yourself or that you should feel guilty for, I mean, most of these men have families or, or have been in positions where, and I think this is like a lot of people in society have gotten to the point where they have gotten in such repetitive states of not taking care of themselves that it's just the status quo.
No, I like that. You downloaded the wrong advice. You got to defrag your hard drive.
Right. And okay, like what, just a haircut or just a nicer shirt or something. But it's amazing just seeing like the difference in posture. They're different, like they look years younger from smiling so much. And they chose an area for the most part that's like the rural South. And some of these men are like, I've never met a gay man in my life. Or like, I like voted for Trump. And sometimes they would just air like their conversations with these men. And, there's a guy, one of the gay men had a very religious background, which was very damaging to him. And he was talking to a pastor, and there was just like so much love and empathy between these two people that, I mean, they could have been at opposite ends of a protest in another situation. And one of the queer guys is black, and he and a police officer were having a conversation that was just like, I mean, like they were both in tears by the end. And so it's like seeing these real representative changes just happen through conversations without accusatory, okay, this person's canceled, or this person's an SJW who's just offended. Like there's just so many ways on either side to label people, and it's very lazy. It doesn't actually lead, I think, productive pathways to change, but it just is like preaching to the choir of your own in-group. Oh, look, there's the offended, crybaby liberal, or there's the oppressive Nazi sympathizer, you know, especially if they look the part, so to speak. And even associating with like either of these characters, particularly maybe on the left side of the spectrum, like David Hogg, who is a student who survived Parkland. He's still, I think, teenager.
Yeah.
Very young. I mean, big props. He's doing a lot as an activist in his community. While I think he's attending college. There's a picture of him with a member of the Proud Boys, who are associated with Gavin Newsom. They're associated kind of loosely with, or maybe not so loosely, with Charlottesville protests.
Right.
Pretty, you know, it's controversial. And there's a picture of David Hogg, like, standing next to them, taking a picture, saying that he had a discussion with them. And oh my goodness, these tweets. He's canceled. They said he's a Nazi.
Oh, David Hogg?
David Hogg is a Nazi sympathizer. And people were asking, oh, why? And there was just this picture of him standing next to them with like a caption that he posted saying like, oh, we had a productive conversation.
Case closed.
Oh, and so, I mean,
put like a cancel sign, but then just like put a swastika like instead of a cancel.
Yeah.
It's like,
I mean, who it's okay to I think analyze, especially a group, saying, okay, the Proud Boys, I think most of them are trolls, aren't they? Like, I don't think it's necessarily literal.
You know, it's hard to say. Like, that there's a lot of back and forth on that whole situation that made that group famous, but it just seemed like a bunch of like teenage boys that were like partly just trying to have their own fun, but also there was like a little bit of sincerity, and you know, they were raised in a place where wearing the MAGA hats were cool, and it was a thing where it's like you did it and you were part of a group, and
it's also not the norm. It also, certain people love the feeling of riling someone up and getting, for some reason, there's that reward. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen or heard Milo Yiannopoulos. Oh yeah, man, that's his thing.
Just instigating and being the hat is
not everyone's a shitster, but a lot of people are.
Or like Kanye, he's like, I put the hat on and I'm a whole new person, you know. But you can't be standoffish with people and expect them to learn in the same way. Like, the minute it's you against me and like your argument is trying to beat my argument, that's where good communication and like actual learning goes to the wayside.
I've totally changed my mind like over the past few years. I remember studying in school. I was taking my AP politics class in 2010, 2011, and it was kind of after Citizens United had passed. It was during the rise of the Tea Party, and I'm horrified watching Obama's second term crash and burn, and I'm thinking, why Republicans are good at organizing. They have totally monopolized. We're the party of values. They're clearly identified, and they've taken values that are vague, like patriotism and freedom. If you see a car driving by with an American flag on it and no other bumper sticker, you know exactly what they believe and who they're voting for. And that's a shame, you know, and they totally won the values war. I actually don't like using the word war over every little thing because that's another, you know, manipulation of the media. But so I was thinking, why isn't there an equal grassroots? Tea Party was not grassroots. It was funded by a lot of powerful players made to appear grassroots. But in my head, I was like, why isn't there an equal but opposite effect taking place in the left, where they're being well organized, there's a channel of money, there's support. I mean, surely most people have good values, and in my mind, those good values included compassionate and productive solutions that would benefit the whole of society, like the societies that were crafted throughout Scandinavia that seemed to make so much more sense to me. And now I guess we're in a time where I don't know if it's equal, but it's, or even opposite. I think far-right leftists have more in common with far-right conservatives than the middle. The middle is starving.
Well, for sure. I read one thing where there's a bigger divide in terms of worldviews and political standpoint points between conservatives and liberals than there used to be. That we actually agree
true,
on less on opposite ends of the spectrum now.
Right.
And
I would counter that argument that liberals, moderate, very, very moderate liberals, agree more with Republicans of yore, like 10, 20 years ago, than they do with their own party. I mean, just
possibly, yeah. There's a lot of real like lack of leadership. So I think when you say like where is
in general or on
the Democratic side, like when you say where is the liberal movements that are well organized, like the Tea Party, there was Occupy Wall Street, but that was like, what was funny with that is like it felt like people didn't know what to do. Like, okay, we stormed all the major cities and were protesting, and that was the same around the same time as Citizens United came out. I would just, for those of you who don't know, Citizens United was a bill that was passed that made made it so that so that there was an unlimited amount of money that you can contribute to a campaign if you're a corporation, which there used to be a cap before then. So
redefining corporations as people, which could possibly extend to First Amendment rights.
Yeah.
Very, very, very dangerous to any democracy. It also, lets foreign corporations donate unlimited amounts of money, undisclosed. I think one of the uncomfortable truths of Occupy Wall Street was that we're protesting. You could say specific institutions, Goldman Sachs, this bank, that bank. The general idea of Wall Street, it can be interpreted and used as a defense against Occupy Wall Street. These dirty hippies are protesting against capitalism, the institution that makes America strong, that keeps our families fed. Like, what, you want to live like they do in Venezuela? You want to live like they do in Cuba? Like, you want to, did you see what socialism did and Marxism did in Russia, in China? So, I mean, these are, and those are salient points, right? If that is the argument they're making, the eye, I think, should have been more critically turned on the Obama administration who bailed out these banks in the first place. It could have been turned on the Clinton administration who passed Glass-Steagall. The uncomfortable truth was to point at the governments who have opened their arms to accepting this money and the realization that we have to use the powers that be, the avenues of government to prevent this from happening. But to do so, we shouldn't have been on Wall Street. It should have been Occupy the lawn in D.C. It should have been Occupy the White House, Occupy Congress, Occupy, like we could have, I mean, there were similar movements taking place in D.C. as well. But, I mean, the thing is, that's like going into the jungle and saying, Occupy jaguars for killing all the, what do jaguars eat? I was going to say deer, but okay. Occupy jaguars for killing gazelle. Jaguars are going to kill gazelle. That's what they have to do.
Right.
If they're left unchecked, the jaguar will go crazy. They'll kill all the gazelle, and then the plants will get too big.
Banks are going to be banks.
Banks are going to be banks. Capitalism to me is like an ecosystem, and the government could be.
It's not that you don't want capitalism; you just want it in a healthy ecosystem. Right now, it's not.
Totally. Healthy, right? Yeah, and I think we're in an extreme time when people are realizing, oh my gosh, what I learned in school was bullshit. Like everything all these systems are failing us, which is true. But saying like trying to burn them all down or trying to vilify every single thing or find a culprit, right? So like you didn't own slaves, Joe Shanley, but you're white. Even though your ancestors were probably like off the boat Irish that got discriminated against as a effect of the culture in this country, you have, your things to be guilty for. Now, of course, there's privileges that we can acknowledge, but like you as a person are guilty. Like that, I mean, these extremes ricocheting against, systems that have just been like, we just have to clean the system. We don't need to burn the house down. We just need to like unclog a lot of the pipes. But I mean, this is really serious shit. It's real life stuff. And I think the people in power really benefit when otherwise sound-minded points that can come from a really compassionate place. And I find like I lie closer with democratic values than Republican, because to me they come from a more sound-minded and compassionate place, which I believe are one and the same. They're just manipulated into hysteria. And
the Fox News runs
hyperbole.
a segment on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez every day. That
Right.
They've had thousands of segments on her, and it's just kind of like the David Hogg effect too. Like anybody that is young and speaking their mind and making political waves, as people would do all the time in the past, are vilified in a really unique way that I think like this new media allows them to be vilified in ways that we couldn't be before, you know?
Yeah, it is. We're eating our own. Imagine just the naysayers throughout the 60s and 70s. Not that they were particularly successful as much as they could have been, because they discovered hedonism the same time they discovered injustice, and hedonism wins. Drugs and like rolling around are, and also it's painful. It's painful to discover these injustices. It's difficult to be like a fighter for change, but at the same time having the restraint to be empathetic to the people that you're trying to have conversations with, which is the way forward. It gets a lot of people killed too, or you know, politically killed, vilified, and I think they're, like we've seen with the literal burning of Notre Dame, and the reaction that this is a celebration, or this is something that we should, you know, there's no sacredness in this building. Like there's nothing that's sacred. I was a bit more relieved to
found out that it got destroyed and rebuilt over the course of its history, like several times. Like there used to be a statue of Jupiter, the god Jupiter, there before there was a Christian cathedral, and then there was an early Christian cathedral, and then that was knocked down and a bigger one was put in place, and then 100 years later they added a new hallway, and you know, so on and so forth. So it's like, okay, so this isn't like the pyramids that have been that way since the beginning of civilization that you know have been changed. Like it'll be rebuilt, as it's already been billionaires donating $100 million, millions of dollars to relief efforts already.
Well, what I was
sorry,
no, it's okay. I meant you know, the iconoclasm of denouncing this building is nothing. It's not sacred, and the memes and the humor and the you know, the comment that you just addressed, I think that's an example of this large cultural, like, what can you think of on the internet that hasn't been made fun of, or that would be, you know, too far, or a person that has, you know, tried to, like you said, speak from their heart and use their voice and do good in the world, that isn't mocked, that isn't brought down. People that are trying to make genuine art, people that are trying to make genuine political changes, people that are looking for a spiritual path, and people that are looking for meaning and depth in their lives. I mean, it's so much of it, like, to really excel, you have to either completely block out those sources or just really not care about them.
Right. Well, it's how you look at history, and you have to be really aware of your previous history if you want to become the author of the future. And along the lines of what you're saying, how we eat our own and we tend to repress or hate on these free thinking or voices that just speak their own opinion, whether we disagree with them or not, is a lot of people, especially on the left, look at Western civilization as a whole and its monuments as a system of systematic oppression, and one that they never really identified with. And it's like made me question too, what are the fundamental values of Western civilization and why are they important? And I feel like that's something that we might have lost touch with. Um, One thing I know that I firmly agree with about like what Western civilization has done for humanity is the emphasis it placed on the individual and individual freedoms and rights of a person, which is something that's hugely important. You want to give everybody the right to speech, everybody the right to worship which religion they please, um, the right to own property and exchange goods. And you can laugh at those things, but those basic tenets of who we are every day in society, it's just in the air we breathe, whether you consciously think about it or not, are things that we take for granted in a lot of ways because we've just been born up in a world where we had them. But if we had a little bit more of that historical context, we might not be so quick to throw away the idea of the West or all the sacrifices that individuals made to get us to where we are today. Like even the fact that we're living and breathing in the first world is due to the fact that our ancestors did not give up. They worked hard, they worked together, and through perilous conditions to get to where we are now. And I just, you got to thank them, you know. You got to like spend a moment of gratitude to be like, wow, it was thousands of generations of people that made sacrifices that led to my existence here today. Let me do something that not only is worthwhile in my life so I can continue this, you know, what was it all for, but like honor them in a way, honor the sacrifices they made by doing something meaningful with me.
I think it's interesting that you say my ancestors wanted, unless I don't know if you know, like I have a 23andMe or something, but like your ancestors, I would guess, are just off the boat, like Irish Italians, right? Like they didn't necessarily found the country, but most of all of us, unless we were indigenous, or came here in a tragic way, as we did with slavery, are immigrants, came by choice. And so there was definitely an attraction based in everything that you talked about, those sacrifices that created this new world. And I do think it's, on the one hand, I understand the compassion that goes into wanting to respect other philosophies and ways of life, but it's dangerous to start claiming that all cultures are equally noble.
Right.
Like, okay, so let's go back in history and point to a society, a very tyrannical monarchy, or something as despicable that we all know is universally despicable as fascism. I mean, if we put that through the 2019 lens, you know, and someone said, well, you know, we need to be respectful of fascists because their fundamental religious beliefs are that Jewish people and whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like, that would be obviously appalling. And so when we see,
I have a friend that is like a pro-fascist, and not in the sense of like,
why are you friends?
Like he's actually Jewish himself, but very interesting
himself, I
model.
guess.
Well, you know, there's a lot of different strands of it. Like one of the books that I'm reading right now is a book by Julius Evola, who was a fascist in the 1930s in Italy that did not get along with Mussolini, but had a lot of radical and outdated idea. Put it out, I don't agree with his ideology, but there was a spectrum of fascist ideology, and in some cases, in the short term, it lifted economies up. So that was one of the arguments that he's making. I'm not making the argument for fascism. I think in the long run, it's a terrible thing that suppresses people. But it just goes to show how, like, anything which we can look at as the villain, there's other people that just have such a totally different view of reality than us, that they'll say these things. and will bat an eye and go, what? Like, you think that fascism is actually a good thing for societies to be in? And you get in this kind of like this clashing sense where you can't see the other person's side. So it's just like nothing is ridiculous to me anymore. I just kind of let people open up as they will, but also have a very reserved sense of like, okay, I think I believe that, you know.
I think it's a salient point to question or at least reassess what are the Western values, just as you did before, and talk about our originating goals that have modeled the country. I think in some ways they're at risk of both becoming like feverishly clung to. I think trying to force the Constitution to look exactly the same as it did at its founding. And there are, I mean, not all libertarians believe this, but many believe that we need to strip the government to bare bones.
Yeah.
Go back to the time before taxes,
right. So those are the two
where we
extremes.
had volunteer militias.
Yeah. Either you're so conservative you think that the what they say, like the conservatives say that the Constitution is like a dead document, like it's not, it's set in stone as it is,
versus a living document.
Then the other side of it is that all of this history and prior ways of doing things should be erased for a new way of being in society and government.
Right. So
do you know who John Winthrop is? He was a Protestant priest in early colonizer of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in like 1630, like one of the first waves of colonization, and he gave this sermon on a ship.
I think my ex-boyfriend was related to him.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he would talk about being related to like someone who was signed the Mayflower contract. It might have been John Winthrop. Yeah. I'm like getting a weird flashback.
But he was the one that said, and many presidents have quoted this since, that our city will be, or our civilization that we're starting in this massive new territory that we don't even know how expansive it is, will be but a city upon a hill, one that the rest of the world will have their eyes on and look at as an example of how to carry themselves, how to act. And I think in many ways, Western civilization and the US, which has deep roots in that philosophy, has that kind of mindset that the rest of the world has their eyes on us and will act as we act. Now, I think this is less true now that some of the superpowers in other parts of the world, like China, has opened up, and now kind of like a lot of eyes are on China as what they will do. But I think that's one interesting idea, is that the West is a place that leads by example. And
so we're on values. I think an adapting value like our living Constitution. I think so many of these movements come from at some level a good place. And of course, I'm of two minds on this, because it can be done in a very productive way for society. But the cultural equivalencies of founding U.S. values, or the modern U.S. values, with non-Western countries that hold very oppressive views, but are majorly non-white societies. And so without trampling on other religions, but criticizing their treatment of women, or their political structures, that is now dangerous. It's dangerous to do things like that in the public eye, and be criticized then as someone who's Islamophobic, or someone who is imperialistic, which I think puts a lot of vulnerable people at risk. I mean, I think women's rights, regardless of like the certain traps that taking feminism in a certain direction can take you, like that's always going to be something I think is important, even if I can't line up or support certain directions feminism, and I don't think anyone should just
Right.
download an entire dogma and say, I want that label, I'm sticking to it. You should always think critically and say, well, I agree with this, but not this, and really take your time to think about everything that you're downloading.
Yeah,
and hearing.
sharpen your views
But,
as an individual
yeah.
rather than think about what collective you can join.
Which
What
is
always
so hard
amazes-
not to do.
Right.
And now I see, people are very active in criticizing what's going on in socially online in American society, becoming offended at certain slights, but unwilling to talk about female genital mutilation that's happening in our own country, and saying, well, they have the right to their culture, they have the right to abuse 5-year-old little girls, they have the right to tell women that they are slaves in their own household. Then but we
It's funny
God
you
forbid
I
we
just got like emotional about this last night
Did
because
you?
I was
Yeah, we didn't
talking
talk about
it
it
with some
beforehand.
friends, and someone asked me, "What do you think about circumcision?" And then the follow-up question was, "What do you think about female genital mutilation?"
I think those two are absolutely comparable. They just have different cultural platitudes.
I would argue that female genital mutilation is worse than circumcision.
Yes,
but circumcision,
yeah, I agree.
I still feel like it's highly immoral. It's one of those things where it's like you've either made up your mind about it or you've never considered it. And if you're one of the people that's listening that's never considered it, and you just sit down for a moment and think about how it's a routine practice to cut the tips off babies' dicks, and that's something that's like, oh, like it's just it's a social norm.
I'd recommend researching how it affects bonding of baby boys with their mothers, and the postpartum effects of women whose children aren't bonding with them, and they're not getting the feedback hormones that they're supposed to be fed because of this unnatural procedure, which perhaps in a certain time in history, did prevent infections. But we have soap and antibiotics and knowledge. And it's like women, their organs are internal. So if women throughout history and time,
well, we have things for that.
We have things for that. And I'm also curious, Judaism, even modern, less orthodox Judaism, their culture has been so persecuted throughout history, and their stories throughout history has been so miraculous that keeping certain things the way they are throughout history, throughout time, is sacrament to them. So that's that is law. No pigs, circumcision. I'm with them on no pigs. I think it's weird to eat pigs.
I saw a political sorry, keep going.
But I was gonna say, I'm curious how that became the dominant American procedure, and part of me is very suspicious about hospitals wanting to collect more checks, or if it's that it just culturally became dominant, because as a country of immigrants, we're taking in, majority European immigrants throughout history. Those people weren't circumcised unless they were Jewish. If you go throughout Europe now, even in England, most men are not circumcised.
When did it just become not a Jewish thing? And
it is the default.
Thing? Yeah.
100% the default.
I had a guy come up to me while I was at the urinal the other day. He's like, "Nice dick, bro. Who did your cut?" No, I'm just kidding.
No.
He didn't do that.
Dr. Rosenthal, I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's just, I'm lucky. My boyfriend and I, we've discussed this, and he actually broke up, or it led to the breakup of one of his relationships, or maybe it was one of several reasons, I'm not sure, because she was adamantly pro circumcision, and in his head he's thought, fuck no, I'm not letting any of my kids get circumcised. But it would look weird.
Yeah, right.
So the way it naturally looks would be like, I don't know. It's just that's an unfair beauty standard. That's how they're born.
That's one of those things where it's like how I kind of feel that from a personal level that women have a little bit more of a say than men do in the outcome of the child, just because it's such a personal experience for them birthing it. But in that instance, it's like the man, I
to
feel
be
like,
in
has
agreement.
just as much of a right to speak about those issues as the woman, has just
Yeah.
as much power. And then here's the
What would
child,
you
the
do?
child with this intact foreskin. Mom and dad fought over this.
What would you do if uh I guess this is something
Show
you
her the facts. I'd be like,
yeah.
you're saying if my partner was like, oh, I think our son should be circumcised.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, if that's what you prefer on a personal preference, then like it's your son. First of
So
all,
you don't have to worry.
you don't have to worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
Second of all, only
The
20%
aesthetics.
of the world I've read
Yeah.
is circumcised.
Right.
20% of males. It's just most males in the Western world are circumcised. But I think that's becoming in the same way like breastfeeding is making a comeback.
Yeah.
I think circumcision is one thing. There's a lot of complications, like you said too, about things that could happen that could go wrong with the circumcision or later in life. And you were saying that it affects mother-son bonding.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, the statistics on that were pretty conclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very sad. Imagine at some level, every circumcised man has a, maybe it's not a vivid memory, but some kind of physical stored experience. Being born to a baby is traumatic. Mm-hmm. They're transitioning from this womb space through all of a sudden they're in the world. They've passed through canal. Mm-hmm. Like, it's immediately disruptive, and
it's a bad day if you're that kid.
It's a weird time.
Yeah, it's a weird day. Yeah.
So babies are wrapped up the way they are to mimic being in a womb. The sounds that they're played, the rocking motion, everything that's done to soothe children is to mimic the experience of a womb. Even adults, even if it's hot, have to sleep with a blanket on, and at some level it's because I'm getting nestled in, like the feelings that are when you transition even from going from cold to warm. The reason that's so comforting at some level, I'm sure, is probably from like just savoring in the warmth.
You're blowing my mind right now.
It's so we mimic like things we don't even realize. The things that are relaxing to us, that white noise sound, the ocean sounds. Think of how the world sounds through the filter of skin, and there's So the first experience you've had, one of the first times you've ever been touched or held, is a traumatic experience at a sexual level, and then being pushed back into your mother's arms. There's a distrust that happens that will be at some level stored. Perhaps it'll not have a conscious effect on your life, but it's difficult to say. If that makes it more difficult for you to nurse, for you to bond, that creates a severance of that relationship, that first early connection and communion. That could translate, just the idea that I couldn't imagine not questioning that as a mother. Like, okay, I just had a baby, now he has to have surgery. God forbid anything ever happens to a child I would give birth to that they would need, they had a lung issue or a heart issue, and like they had to go to surgery. That would be the worst thing that ever happened to me. It'd be so scary. But to say, we're going to do a surgery that isn't necessary, and you have to pay for it, and your son has to deal with it. And at brisses, it's apparently common that these older men who have different forms of herpes give it to children by the rituals to suck the blood off of the tip of their penis.
Yeah.
Which is unnecessary.
Think about that.
Unnecessary. And though that was what I just said, if interpreted the wrong way, could be a form of, well, Connie, you're being, critical of another culture. You're saying that our culture, this, European Anglo culture of non-circumcision, is superior than a culture that does circumcise. Which I'm not saying, but I think that you should criticize both your own culture and others for not upholding the values that are fundamentally going to advance human society forward. And when we're talking about oppressing women at a fundamental level, oppressing children, babies, bringing them into physical harm unnecessarily.
Yeah, that's why I
We
say,
need to be able to talk about
I got
that.
emotional last night talking about this. It's funny you bring this up again. It's like, okay, what's the more level-headed way of thinking about this? But now I'm just thinking about all of the ways I was subconsciously motivated through actions for just the longing of the womb. Like how many things I do is just like I want the womb back. Poof. Weird. They say like your parents' home is like the second womb, and moving out is like that's like the second process
gross.
of giving birth is like the final separation between the parents and the child. And some people don't leave that for years.
I feel like that's like a weird Facebook meme that like someone's aunt posts with like a minion on it. A little bit. Oh man.
Yeah. Well, if you've learned anything today, folks, it was an accident. Not circumcisions, those were on purpose. We're talking about the fire in the cathedral, but it's a day after it happened, so I don't know. It's just kind of on our minds, and forgive us if the information isn't all like up to date and relevant and when you're listening to this, because again, we're just hearing about this and kind of emotionally responding to the shock. But yeah, I'm glad that we're both secretly impassioned. We didn't know about the same issue recently.
Yeah, that's funny. I wonder why that's been more in the public consciousness, the collective consciousness. It's one of Andrew Yang, which this is ballsy of him. Andrew Yang's campaign points is that I mean, he's not going to ban circumcision from anybody. That's just his personal belief. I've never heard a politician speak on that.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Andrew Yang is a political candidate running for the Democratic Party presidential election in 2020 right now. And if you go to his policy page, depending on when you're listening to this, but
Yang2020.
if you go to Yang 2020 or whatever it is, he has a lot of really interesting ideas for radical change in society, but makes a lot of sense. Like radical change in like the slow way of doing it. Like, okay, if our military is overfunded, let's defund it by 10% and kind of like allocate resources better and then see what happens. So
he's a candidate that I find when I think about Trump and all the different people he was able to attract across many different party lines. He won blue states, he won swing states, he won independents. He was able to secure votes from disenfranchised middle Americans that the Democratic Party has grown away from in, you know, perhaps noble, perhaps elitist attempts to. I think they've co-opted diversity. They've maybe taken advantage of certain movements and momentums and grown certain divisions, as the mainstream Republican Party also has. But I think he has the unique ability and is the only candidate I can think of either party, but especially of the Democrats, to completely speak the language of middle America. He comes from an entrepreneurial point of view, and he understands that more wealthy consumers is better for business, to have people with more money in their pockets, to have solutions to these big problems and not just some vague thing that sounds good, like, oh, we'll get, you know, these 50-year-old truck drivers coding and ship them off to Silicon Valley.
I was telling some people about Andrew Yang, and one person who's very politically involved said, I haven't heard of them. It must be like pie in the sky in the sense of they're never going to be electable if I haven't heard of them.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, like, at this point in 2007 or the time before Obama was elected, Obama was just like an unknown senator,
junior senator,
that nobody got behind. And it's just like the wave of public support could always come in an instant. But a lot of the time, it's not about candidates winning; it's about mainstreaming their ideas.
Right.
Think about how many ideas Bernie, whether he wins this election or not, threw into the mainstream dialogue last election by losing. This has been a very heavy episode, Connie.
Oh yes.
We're already an hour deep. That went quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to put a warning at the beginning. There's not a lot of jokes in this episode.
Oh shoot! Yeah, we'll have to pull them all at the end.
Yeah. Do you have a song of the week you're thinking of?
I have, yeah, a few. Let me like narrow them down.
Okay.
To edit this a little bit. Do you have a song you were thinking of? I like how we've been just doing one.
Yeah.
Like one group song. I think we should agree on it. Let's see.
Do you like Lizzo?
Lizzo?
You know the artist Lizzo?
No.
Oh, okay. I'll have to show you after this. I'm just letting this run, but I'll edit this.
Yeah.
I think
I actually do have a song.
I picked the song last week. So.
Okay. It's called "I'm Kin" by Colleen. Colleen is a.
Wait. Do you have a song of the week, Connie?
I do have a song of the week. Okay.
Do you have a song of the week, Connie?
Yeah, I have a song of the week. It's called "I'm Kin" by Colleen.
Colleen, yes.
Yeah.
I love her.
You do?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's this French, I mean, she's so crazy multi-talented. A lot of her early albums are just like, it's not noise, because when noise artists are like very industrial, but using chimes, sound bowls,
kind of like ambient music.
Ambient. There's elements of electronic in there. Mm-hmm. Then she has this whole album that builds on those sounds with cello. Then
what was the song that
this one is called "I'm Kin" and
I am kin.
I'm
okay. I'm actually gonna go and listen to this afterwards now because
it's beautiful.
I like forgot that Colleen was an artist until you brought her up again. I'm like, wow, she's actually an amazing artist that I need to like run through her
albums and albums of no vocalization, just instruments. And this album she finally sings, and it's like her voice is so ethereal and beautiful, and it's amazing that for so long her music didn't include it. Like imagine just like being with someone that was this beautiful artist that was mute, that didn't speak, and then they open their mouth and it turns out they're this amazing poet as well, that's able to articulate the things that they're making in a very sonorous way. So the song connects to, it's literally I'm kin to every rock, I'm kin to the ocean, I'm kin to, like, it's just this beautiful, poetic and thoughtful little 3-minute song that just like blows me away.
Would you ever want to do like an album review? Not like an hour-long thing, but like a 10-minute, we'll listen to an album and nice. Yes. Let us know if you guys want us to do album reviews. Something we'd probably have a lot of fun doing. All right, I think that's it. So we'll call it a week. Hopefully we'll upload one next week as well. That's about it from the first walk. Ask good questions and Hare Krishna. Yeah, man. Okay, see you later. All right, bye. Wait, bye.